Glad to have you join us on News Now. I am Folashade Ogurinde. Nigeria's debt profile is set to rise to 42.7 trillion naira from its current rate of 35.5 trillion naira. This comes as the Nigerian Senate recently approved President Buhari's fresh loan request of $16 billion and 1.02 billion euros respectively. The loans, according to the president, will help finance projects in agriculture, electricity, digital economy and the industrial sector. The World Bank, African Development Bank and the French Development Agency are among some of the funding agencies. Now, joining me to discuss this further is the CEO and Managing Director of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, what do you make of the fresh loans being approved by the Senate? Do you have any major concerns?
Thank you, for having me. Of course, there are concerns which many of us have expressed at the rate at which Nigeria is accumulating debt. The challenge we have today is that the debt so far accumulated cannot be said to have been used exclusively for infrastructure development so as to build the capital base that will catalyze faster economic productivity. But most of the debt so far accumulated have gone into either debt service or recurrent expenditure. And that's where the concerns are. Added to the fact that given our current debt profile, you are looking at a debt service to revenue of close to 90%. That is clearly not sustainable. And a lot of times, government officials talk about debt to GDP. And when you recognize the fact that our GDP is not, the relationship between our GDP and our revenue is very, very low. So you can't use GDP debt to GDP as a basis to determine our debt sustainability. The concerns remain that at this point, the government should, instead of trying to fund some of the issues, some of the things they mentioned, agriculture, digital economy, they should focus on attracting private capital investment into those sectors and focusing on creating an enabling environment and enabling regulation that private sector will now fund those things instead of government trying to borrow to fund them.
Now, while it has been argued that these borrowings are necessary for economic development, are there not other means governments can explore to bring about this much needed development to the country?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was alluding to earlier, that the government at this point should focus on bringing private sector. If you look at, for instance, one of the most vibrant sectors of the economy, which is actually the third largest contributor to the GDP, that is the telecommunications sector. It grew from barely 1%, less than 1%, to more than 16% today, principally from private sector investment. I don't think the federal government can say that it's investing in infrastructure in the telecommunications sector. Similarly, we can grow other sectors by creating the right economic structure, creating the right legal framework to bring in private capital. Take, for instance, the rail sector. There's no reason why the private sector cannot build standard gauge rails in the country and run the coaches. There's no reason why the Nigerian private sector cannot build world-class airports and operate them under build, operate, and transfer. There's no reason why the private sector cannot build the seaports. So why should government continue to borrow to build this infrastructure when you can actually bring in private capital? And the good thing that we have a proof of concept. The telecommunication sector is a clear proof of concept that private sector, under appropriate regulation and incentive, can build the infrastructural backbone that will support economic activities.
Now, another issue that came up during a plenary at both the upper and lower chambers is the terms and conditions tied to these loans. Now, with the commercial nature of these loans, do you think Nigeria would be able to pay back these borrowings or loans in record time?
Well, for the government to borrow, pay back, you know, these loans are what you call, they are backed by the government revenue. So it simply means that we continue to use our revenue to service those debts. And I mentioned earlier, we're already maxing to the limit in terms of debt service to revenue. So unless our revenue grows, we may get to a point where we need to borrow to pay maturing loans, which has been the concern many of us have been expressing, that current revenue profile of the government does not support additional borrowing. And I de-emphasize the need for the government to look at alternative avenues to fund infrastructure instead of continuing to borrow.
Now, some experts have argued that the country is still within the appropriate debt ratio, but more borrowings could put the country in unfavorable conditions, which could, of course, jeopardize the future of unborn generations. What do you make of this?
Well, those arguments that Nigeria's debt is still at current levels are sustainable because they're obviously comparing debt to GDP. And if you use debt to GDP to measure your debt and Nigeria's debt sustainability, we say Nigeria is actually under-leveraged. But for me, and for most analysts, that is not an objective basis to appraise our debt sustainability given the fact that we do not have a strong revenue profile. Most of our revenues are coming from non-productive based or not a sector that not high, that does not have high productivity within the economy, like the oil and gas sector. So if you recognize the fact that at current debt service, we are doing close to 90% of debt service to revenue. So you have to appreciate that at that level, our debt is no longer sustainable. But to put it more succinctly, if you have a huge vehicle that is not operating, you cannot use that vehicle that you have parked at home as a basis to determine your income, because unless if the vehicle is a commercial vehicle and is productive, it cannot be a measure of how much income you are earning. So that's the situation we have today. The current structure of the economy is such that our GDP does not generate the kind of revenue that is commensurate with the size of the GDP. We're talking about revenue to GDP, tax revenue to GDP of less than 5%. So how can that be the basis for you to now measure the country's debt sustainability when your debt is currently growing and you can barely earn enough to pay the interest obligations associated with those debts? We're not talking about principal repayment yet.
Now, finally, before I let you go, how well would you appraise government's implementation of the loans borrowed in the past, especially when you put in consideration concerns by many Nigerians that sometimes these loans are borrowed and at the end of the day, nothing to show for it or little to show for it?
Well, if you look back at some of the policies of the government in the past, at some point they said subsequent borrowing will go to infrastructure. That has not been adhered to. So we've seen situations where if you look at previous year's budgetary performance, you will realize that most of the debts borrowed went into recurrent expenditure. And that means we have not invested that debt into capital assets. As long as you're not investing the debt, the borrowing into fiscal assets that will support stronger economic growth, then you cannot be said to have utilized the debt in the most effective and efficient way. Added to that is that even if the government is borrowing to invest in infrastructure, in terms of value for money, government is not the most efficient manager of economic resources. So you realize that value for money, even if government invests in infrastructure, there are a lot of wastages inbuilt into government procurement process, unlike when private sector is involved. So the private sector is known to manage resources more efficiently, to invest in infrastructure at more cost-effective levels, and to extract more value from economic assets than the government. So with that logic, the government, even if they claim they are borrowing for infrastructure, cannot be justified.
All right, CEO and Managing Director of Carrier Assets Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, thank you very much for your contribution on the program. We'll take a break here, but still to come, we'll discuss the IMF report, which revealed that more than 234 bank branches were closed in 2020. To stay with us.
Corruption not in my country.
Hello, Alhaji. Right now I'm in Abuja. No. Hello, Adamu. Right now I'm in Kano. Yes, when I get back. I will just call you. Look, what is wrong with you? I'm talking on the phone and you are gesticulating and doing. What's wrong with you?
Daddy, where exactly are we as we speak?
Are you alright? This is Lagos.
But you just lied to someone that we are in Abuja.
Keep quiet. Who told you you can tell an elderly person is lying?
Daddy, you just lied. And by lying, you are raising corrupt children for the future of Nigeria. That is corruption, not in my country.
Corruption not in my country.
Welcome back. A recent report released by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has disclosed that Nigerian banks closed 234 branches, while 649 automated teller machines were also closed in 2020. Consequently, the number of commercial branches in Nigeria fell to 5,158 in 2020 from 5,392 in 2019. This led to a decline in the country's financial access score to 4.44 in year against 4.78 in 2019. While innovation and growth in Nigeria's e-commerce space may have influenced this decline, how significant is this development on Nigeria's banking sector and by extension the economy? A senior economist and partner at SPM Professional, Mr. Paul Alaje, joins me now to deliberate on the matter. Thanks so much for coming on the program. Now, the figure given by the IMF on closed branches is on the high side. Why do you think these banks shut down branches in the first place?
Okay, so 2020 was the year of pandemic. Quite a number of institutions were affected. A number of sectors were affected because people did not go out. So it is normal for some of the branches to be affected, some of the deposit money bank branches to be affected in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, because of COVID and to be compliant, a number of commercial banks had rotated activities where they told some of their staff to work in a week, and the following week they asked them to go home, perhaps sometimes for a week, sometimes for 2 weeks, to see if any of them will show symptoms of the pandemic of COVID, so that they will be sure and protect lives and property, not just of their staff, even of the general public. And because there were a lot of restriction around movement, that had also implication on how people could go out to use the automated teller machine. So that is why quite a number of teller machines, among other reasons, by the way, were shut down, and some banks also do not have sufficient hands, or some of their branches were also closed down. So economic activity were tremendously affected. We saw Nigeria economy went into negative growth up to -6%. That has also implication on the entire financial sector and entire financial system. Recall that sometimes around 2020, non-performing loan also started to go up, but until recently that we have seen some level of improvement, even though it's not sufficient, but it's still within the acceptable corridor. But I can tell you that the impact of COVID was also felt in the financial sector in Nigeria.
Now let's take a look at the number of ATM machines that were also closed down. What do you think led to this?
Well, when you compare over 600 to the total number of ATM machines that are operational in Nigeria, you see that the number seems large, but first, in the second quarter, majority of Nigeria were pretty much at home according to government policy in order to save lives. Again, even when there were releases that people can go back to their work, states such as Lagos State still omitted some days. Quite a number of private sector, organized private sector, they were not working fully. So because the demand for ATM reduced, it is also normal for availability of ATM to also reduce. Recall also that towards the end of the year, last year, around October, specifically 2020 October, there was a riot attack on those that were protesting, and that also led to breaking of ATM machines, started in Lagos, and it spread like wildfire across the country, up to Jalingo, up to Adamawa, Taraba, vandalization here and there. ATM of banks were not spared. That's another factor. So 2020 was just an interesting year because there were a lot of shocks that came in the year, both domestic and external factor that we had no control over. So as demand continued to reduce for ATM because of people activity, It will also have impact on how many ATM will be operational. Some banks were directly affected in terms of their books, and it will also have impact on the ATM that will be available. Some of the branches, as more branches are shut down, the ATM at those branches will also not work effectively or not be available in some instances. So that will also add to the numbers.
Now, do you think the closing of branches and ATMs signify distress in the banking sector?
Well, to a large extent, the banking sector was affected, even though our online platform made Nigeria Bank to thrive even in COVID. Recall that during COVID, one of the sectors that National Bureau of Statistics released that had some level of growth was the banking sector, because even though people were at home, they could still access financial services even in their homes. They could transfer money and so on and so forth. So because of all of those, the impact was much, but it was reduced because of availability of online service to the people. That said, I would also say that the agency banking is becoming far more popular in Nigeria. You would have seen shops, kiosks that people put up, and they call POS shops, where people can transfer money, which ATM cannot do for them. With POS, you can transfer, you can receive, and so many other things, functionality that it has. Unlike ATM machines that are owned by separate individuals, some banks have extended their branches, quote and unquote, to the POS point. They've registered quite a number of agents to run their agency banking for them, and this is also make penetration and those who are banked to be more within the country, those that are covered by financial services. Within the financial sector, I beg your pardon, to be more. So it's an improvement. But you see, what we may not be able to cover now is the extent of how POS has replaced ATM. But I can tell you, for urban center and places where there is this interaction between urban and rural center, the growth of POS is really becoming huge. That said, on the other side, in rural community, it is easier to have POS than to have ATM, because POS can be, managing it is relatively easier. People that operate POS are within the community. They know the security level of such environment. Unlike when banks are coming with bullion van with money, it may actually portend a lot of insecurity. So it is the individual going to bank to deposit cash in cases where they have excess, and also to receive from the public within their local community and take to the banks. So some of these things have replaced the activities of ATM machines, even though the impact is tremendous, the impact is huge. But because those are running banks and also producers of ATM are considering the financial implication of all of this, yes, there was COVID in 2020. I expect that 2021, there will be a lot of improvement in terms of access, financial access in Nigeria, because some of the ATMs that were shut down, some of them are open now, and we also have more and more POS, which will make Nigeria to even have a figure that is higher than what we had in 2019, or at worst, the kind of figure we had in 2019 when 2021 report is published.
Now, still on effects, how badly do you think this affected the jobs and livelihood of people in these affected branches?
Yeah, certainly it will have negative impact on jobs. Unemployment figures published in the third quarter 2020 increased to 33%, according to the Nigeria National Bureau of Statistics. That on one side. Even the labor force, which a lot of people don't pay attention to, reduced from over 80 million to about 69 million. And that was very, very significant. Labor force is the total number of people that are willing and able to work within an economy. When you compare that with a population of 206 or 208 million, you'll be worried. One of the contributors to that remained the banking sector, where quite a number of branches have been shut down. Evidence, the International Monetary Fund report has also corroborated some of the reports that were available and we've seen before now. So impact will be on jobs, and it will make life to be relatively tougher for people. Lower labor force with higher unemployment, that is disturbing, that is worrisome, and I think those in authority, we need to do something about it. So as you have more branches shut down, or maybe because the advent of technology, apart from the pandemic, technology could also contribute to that, to some of the reasons why you might be having reduced branches and so on and so forth. But something is certain, those who are within the financial sector, we need to have another skill, because the skill they have, being a teller, receiving cash and dispensing, machines have started to replace them. In fact, rather than working in a bank and receiving and disbursing money, I know bankers do far more than those responsibilities. There is treasury department, they do quite a number of other things. They invest, put money in treasury bill and bonds. I understand, but I'm saying that those with basic skills in the banking sector need to have a rethink. If not, gradually the trend, the technological trend is making them become an endangered species, because skills required for today's banking is far more advanced than the traditional knowledge they were taught in schools, in colleges, in schools of accounting, and so on and so forth, even in financing, traditional schools. So they need to get more skills for them to compete in their future.
Now, recently, the CBN granted approval to some telcos to operate Payment Service Bank. What do you make of this?
Well, the banking sector should smell the coffee. It is no longer World Wide Web. It's a world without walls. What demarcates sectors and industry has completely been removed. Before now, what we know Tesla for was completely different. Tesla is now known for producing electric cars. Microsoft was not a phone producer. Today, you have Microsoft phones. Quite a number of things are changing as industry are merging through backward and forward integrations. Among other things that all the organizations are doing, people are investing from one sector to the other. Already, the contribution by telcos has been investigated and is very huge to the financial sector. If you want to use USSD to transfer money in your bank, you need to have the support of telcos. If you want to, quite a number of things, even when you deposit bank, you will send SMS. So they look at what the gains are. And those that are in banking sector today, they should understand that the future bank will not be domiciled with any bank. Future account will not be domiciled with any bank. Currency of fiat will be fading away. In fact, Nigeria joined the trend earlier than imagined with e-Naira. What will happen is monies will be carried on virtual wallets, which telcos stand of huge advantage to provide people with, because data, as we speak, is life, and more people will join the trend. What may make bank to survive in the next 10 to 20 years could be because of quite a number of Nigerians that are not educated. But you see, even a 3-year-old or 5-year-old found it somehow convenient to use mobile phones. I still find it very difficult to explain what's happened as a 3 to 4-year-old boy or girl will play game that he or she has not been taught, but after interacting with it for 2 to 3 weeks, he start playing games on a mobile phone. The same thing will happen if banks don't change from traditional banking, knowing that the future of bank remains with who can access data or who can take banking virtually, and those who also have strong customer service, and those who can keep customer, of course, those who are the king. So with licenses coming, I'm sure that in coming period, you might even have others not coming, more joining. So it's either banks wants to set up a request for telco license and also play in that space for them to remain king, or you see merger or some sort coming in near future. This may not be 1 year, it may not be 5 years, but certainly it could be within the decade or the 2 decades to come. You start seeing merger happening within telcos and operators in the banking sector. And this certainly will happen. because there seems to be no limit. The demarcation between financial services or banking sector and those in telecom sector are being eroded from time to time. You have seen banks being stranded because service coming from telco were not available. So for the whole day, people are stranded walking into the bank, but they found it convenient to transfer in the comfort of their homes, which was very difficult if you and I will flash back to before the 2000s. In fact, to make deposit, you have to fill a form. You cannot transfer to another branch within the same bank. It was that difficult in the 90s, in the early 90s. But because technology came and changed the way we see things, it has changed the way we think. Today, I'm able to talk to you because of data, because of the newness of life, because we now live in a world without walls, a world without walls. So bankers or those in the banking sector should smell the coffee, and it should affect bankers, I can tell you. The way we run central bank and make monetary policy in coming period just have to change.
Well, senior economist and partner at SPM Professional, Mr. Paul Alaji, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And it's a wrap on the program. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye for now.